Hi everyone, I hope you all are doing good. Okay, so it has been quite a time I have put some content on my YouTube channel. So, in my today's session, basically, I'm going to cover a topic called security of web or API applications. It may be your web application or RESTful service. Okay, basically, what are the various security measures you have to place in order for it to pass through various application stores? It may be Windows Store, it may be Android Store, or it may be Apple Store. Okay, so let's start with it. Okay, so I'm going to explain some of the most important security measures you have to take care. Okay, again, this session is basically technology agnostic. Okay, we are independent of any technology. Okay, but these points are basically common for all kind of web or Windows applications basically. So let's start with it. First point, user sessions must automatically expire after the specified maximum number of minutes of user inactivity. Okay, if you are creating a web application or Windows application, it is always a good practice to track the user's activity. If the user is inactive for say 15 minutes or 40 minutes, then you should basically show and pop up like that your session has will expire, okay, in 10 minutes, or you can show directly that your session has been expired and your application is logged out automatically. Okay, I would prefer the approach of automatically logging out the application because it basically prevents your session being kept for a longer period of time. Okay, or you can go with another approach which I have shown here, where you will just tell the user that before the expiry, if there is only 10 minutes remaining for the expiry and user has not done any activity, then you can show this kind of pop-ups that your session will expire in 10 minutes. Do you want to log out or keep working? Okay, so this is one good practice basically. So just imagine a scenario. So you have logged into your application. Okay, you can see it handles mission critical data. Okay, and due to some reason, okay, you left your desk, okay, when you are working into your team, and basically you didn't lock your laptop. So this particular application is basically logged in, and if you have not ensured this measure of automatically logging out the user after a certain amount of inactivity, so anybody who is around, they can easily access this application. Okay, because you have not logged out, and active session is available for that user. So to avoid such scenarios, it is always better to log out your application after a certain amount of inactivity. Okay, so please ensure that you implement this particular security measure. Okay, otherwise I have seen in most of the security reviews the applications got rejected in their UAT features just because this particular security feature is not there. So second point, software application should not be open for buffer overflow attacks. Buffer overflow attack, I think many of you are already aware. Okay, so basically a user or a malicious attacker, what he can do is he can send an enormous or huge amount of data to your API endpoint or to your web application. Okay, so what happens is, as a developer, when receiving some input into your API endpoints, you have not put some checks. For example, the email ID should be 50 characters long. The file size should be 5 MB. Okay. So ideally, this kind of checks needs to be put in order to avoid this kind of buffer overflow attacks. Otherwise, what happens, some malicious user, what he does is basically, if he has access to application, what he or she does is basically they will start putting a huge amount of data to your API endpoints. Okay, for example, take an example of email ID itself. Okay, ideally an email ID should be 50 characters long, but what they do is basically they will create around MBs of data in your text in their notepad, and simply they will copy and paste it into that field email ID and they will send it to your API. Okay, and what happens is the moment your API server receives this kind of request, it is basically consumes a lot of memory in order to place this incoming request data into the server memory. So it's kind of attack which basically makes your system memory overflow. Okay, if the user sends such kind of requests in a huge amount or huge number, you can say if they sent around 100 to 200 such requests and each request is having MBs or GBs of data, then just imagine what will happen to your server. Basically your server will slow down or it will crash. So basically that user is creating denial of service attacks. Okay, so always ensure that you put a check on your endpoint request data that it should be of specific limit basically. Okay, so let's move on to the third point. Web or REST services needs to be configured to prevent disclosure of information about versions of server software, installed packages and configured plugins. So usually I have seen this whenever you receive some API response, okay, in your Postman or any tool, any third-party tool, the server will end up in sending some framework related information like the Spring version in Java or the ASP.NET framework version or ASP.NET core version or JavaScript related some versions into the response. So basically we should avoid sending such information regarding the software or packages which are being used on your server side code. Okay, so always ensure you should not end up in sending such information. Okay, basically you are giving a hint to attacker that what all technologies you are basically using on your server. Okay, then let's move on to the fourth point. Enforce usage quotas and rate limits for all APIs. So I would suggest you can make use of Azure API management or APG kind of tools in order to ensure usage quotas or rate limits for your APIs. So for example, if I have one API written, that API, okay, should be called these many number of times per user, okay, or per user session, and also the usage quota that for one day you can basically allow these many number of calls to this particular API. Okay, so this kind of usage quotas you have to enforce into your application, web application or APIs basically that you have developed. Fifth point, all input, user and service, okay, must be validated on the server side to permit only the allowed characters and limited field length necessary for the corresponding function, as I already explained in buffer overflow attacks. Always it is not only front end validation guys, but you must do back end validation also. So this is basically the concept of defense in depth guys. So we can't just rely on our front end, but we must ensure all the validations on server side also, so that even if some user tries to place some requests from the backend side using tools like Postman, still he should not be able to achieve any such functionalities. We must have such validation and we should prevent users from doing inappropriate actions basically. So that's it. Always ensure this, put validations both on front end as well as back end, and also when you are dealing with the names, the entity names, description and all, always allow only the permitted characters, only the business permitted characters to be passed to the request. Okay, by this way basically you are going to avoid the XSS attacks, or you can say the cross-site scripting attacks. Okay, what happens is if you allow any character set into your request, that request data basically name or description, then a malicious user, what he can do is he basically inject JavaScript content. Okay, he may inject some script contents, okay, some JavaScript HTML kind of content, which when loaded into your front end it will show a different kind of user interface, or it may distract the entire UI itself. So always ensure that you should always check for only the permitted character sets and never ever allow special characters on like scripting related, programming related constructs into the fields. because if you do that, you are basically allowing attacker to perform XSS attacks, that is cross-site scripting attacks. Very important, and please do consider implementing these validations when it comes to not only length check but also the basically various kind of symbols or characters, special characters that you are going to use in such fields. Sensitive data must not be stored in the JWT payload, which can be decoded easily. Always remember there will be some domain entity related information which you should not save on JWT barrel token. Usually we do that by adding claims to our token or our JWT payload. Okay, we add an IP address claim, and then we add some domain specific like employee ID claim, okay, the department ID claim, the department what I can say, okay, the department reference code kind of things. Always avoid such kind of sensitive data being put into your JWT, okay, JSON web token payload. Okay, it is strictly prohibited, and if the online security test machines, if they encounter this kind of things on your JWT token, then your security reviews will fail. Okay, so always avoid that. Only put the data which is relevant for your end user. Then comes seventh point. If utilized, the domain and path attribute must be set on all session cookies to prevent transmission beyond the required information systems. If you are aware of cookies, basically in web applications, okay, do remember that cookies are basically used to put some kind of information on your client side which can be utilized later. Okay, now what is the best practice? Always remember that you should set the domain and path attribute. Okay, domain means your website address, basically, for example www.abc.com. okay, so always set this path for that cookie. Okay, so whenever request is sent from end user application, then whenever that application adds any number of cookies, basically what the server checks is whether these cookies are coming from the domain or not, or if that cookie's domain value is matching with the web server's domain name. Okay, for example, what happens is if a client side code is sending some information, okay, it is basically reading some information from a cookie. Okay, so what happens is the web browser will simply check whether this cookie has a domain value of www.abc.com or not. Okay, if the cookie doesn't have the domain's name, then that cookie's value will not be read and it won't be sent, basically. Okay, its data won't be sent to your server. Okay, so that is the domain attribute on your cookies, and also the path attribute. Still it's kind of further strict checking. Okay, so if you specify that www.abc.com slash you can say get list. Okay, so www.abc.com slash get list, then you are basically setting this domain to that cookie. Okay, with the path, basically. So only the UI part which is coming into that get list path, only that can read that cookie value, but nobody else. Okay, so this is how you are basically enhancing the security of your cookies. See, setting the domain value to slash is nothing but setting the permission to read the cookie at the entire domain level and send the cookies at the entire domain level, which is completely prohibited. Okay, so always avoid setting this domain attribute of cookie to slash, that is root. No, you always set it at the specific path level. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, and even if such cookies are transmitted to other domains, right, they won't be used because you have already set a specific domain as well as path. Okay, so such cookies will not be used by the cross domains, basically. And also one more thing, if you set this domain and path attribute, if any JavaScript code which want to read this cookie, trust me, it can't read it because you have specifically mentioned, okay, which application and which part of the application, that is basically path, has access to read that cookie. Okay, so that is the security which these two attributes provide to your cookies. So always remember, you must ensure this. Then information systems are to prevent concurrent sessions initiated by the same user account by terminating the existing session. Always remember, never ever allow an application to be open on multiple devices or multiple sessions. Okay, I think this is not at all a good practice for information systems, because there is a possibility that the application being accessed on multiple places and it may end up in doing, okay, unwanted functionalities basically. Okay, so to avoid that, always ensure that there is always only one session is up and running for a user basically. Okay, one user should have only one session, and that should not be open and running on multiple devices. Okay, so very simple. I think for example, you log in into your application in one browser, say Edge Chromium. Okay, you logged in into the application, then you open the Google Chrome or Mozilla Firefox, and then you try to open the application. You enter the valid credentials also, but the moment you try to log in, it should show you an error message that an active session is already exists. Do you want to continue? Do you want to terminate the existing session and continue with a new session? So this kind of measures you need to take as part of this security measure. Okay, so user should, at any instant of time, user should be going with only one session. Okay, not multiple sessions. And then let's go on to the ninth point. All failed access attempts to data, functions and services must be logged. Always remember, any kind of access to your web APIs or your REST services or your microservices, okay, either it is success or fail, always put tracing into your logs so that you can identify what all various attempts were made in order to take access to our web applications or web services. It will also give you a wonderful information, or it will also help you to track what all various domains or what all various IP addresses which are trying to access your APIs. Okay, so that is one advantage of adding this kind of logging functionality for your REST services or application. Okay, then we will go to the 10th point. Information system which processes confidential or sensitive data must not allow form replay. Always remember, form replay is a mechanism where you will be able to click on submit button multiple times, or whenever you refresh the browser will ask you, do you want to resubmit the form with the data whatever you have entered? No, never allow this kind of actions in your information systems or in your web applications. Okay, because especially when you are dealing with the confidential data. Okay, so it should be one shot, either success or failure. The moment you click on button, either it goes for success or it goes for failure. That's it. Again, if you want to enter that again if you want to perform that action, then try with the fresh session, enter the data completely, and then perform the submission. Okay, do not perform a form replay. That is the overall picture of this point. Let's move on to the 11th point. Information systems must not use external resources such as internet services which are not authorized by organization. Yeah, so the web application or RESTful services which you are making use of, always there will be scenarios where you make use of some external services. Just take an example of getting the IP address of your machine. Okay, so you find some fancy service which simply help you to get the IP address of your machine. Okay, so always ensure that this kind of services are allowed by your organization's information security team or IT team. Okay, then only make use of such services, otherwise never ever try such untrusted services. Okay, 11th point, information systems must not be susceptible to directory or file enumeration. Okay, so this point says that whenever a web application or a RESTful service, okay, or I can put it in another way, okay, your web application should never allow you to perform a directory or file enumeration of your server side code or your server side directories basically. Okay, so you should not give such facilities to your end user. And also most important thing being, if you are dealing with restful services or microservices, these microservices should not return your servers, okay, virtual directory or physical directory paths in their responses. That's what this point says about. Okay, you should not give any hint about various directory organization on your server side. Okay, so avoid that. You should not return such path related values in your API responses or in your web applications basically. Okay, so that's what this point deals about. Because there are possibilities that if your entire directory structure is not properly secured, then a malicious user, okay, or an attacker, what he can do is basically he can make use of that path value. He can copy that path value and adding that domain address or trying some other techniques, he can get access to that folders and he can make unintended changes. Okay, he can basically tamper the data, okay, which your directories contain. So that is not allowed. So always avoid returning any kind of file paths or directory paths or file in your API responses. Okay, 13th point, source code must not be sent to an end user machine other than client side code used explicitly for presentation. Always remember, whenever your API or your web application, this applies specifically for web application, okay, whenever your web application renders the output to your browser, it should always render the client side code, which is JavaScript. Okay, so your output or the processed page from server should never give any kind of TypeScript references, C# code, Java code. No, it should not return anything like that. It should only return the client-side code, which is simply required to construct your UI on your browser. Okay, if this is happening, if if you have not observed or due to some misplaced code, if some server side code is being returned to your end user, then you have to immediately take action on that. 14th point, okay, all input user and server must be validated. This I have already discussed. Information systems implementing file upload feature must validate the file size and content type. Always ensure, this is very most important point guys, if you are dealing with file uploads, this is the must requirement that you first validate its file size, because as far as I have seen, no application will ask you to upload a file of any size or infinite size. No, there should be some limits basically when it comes to information systems which are dealing with data, user data. Okay, so always ensure that there is some file size limitation or validation has been put, that you must ensure only, or the user, you must ensure that the user should only upload files of 5 MB, 10 MB, like that. And then the content type, whether it's a PDF, whether it's a docx, that's what you have to ensure. Okay, so always ensure that the user should not end up in uploading .exe files, executables. Okay, form based email submission functions must enforce the use of static sender address and prevent it from modification. Okay, so instead of making use of actual physical email addresses which are associated with real world entities like employees, person, or some user, what this point says is always make use of some static distribution lists, DLs, or static email IDs which are not at all associated with any user, but their whole and sole purpose is to just send some emails to a group of users. That's it. Okay, so make use of static sender addresses. 17th point, all information systems that store or process personal or client confidential data must comply with applicable legal, regulatory, or contractual requirements. System owners or their delegate must therefore demonstrate consultation with organization data protection team. Okay, so always remember that if you are selling some software product or an information system to your clients, always, the moment they access your application for the first time, always show a privacy notice to them. This is all about showing a privacy notice that I accept for this, that we usually see with most of the software applications, some licensing agreement, some privacy notices we usually show. Okay, so just show and pop up that yes, by accessing this application and you are sharing this information, and are you okay for that? So if the user agrees, allow them to access the application. If they deny, then don't allow them to access the application. So that's what this point says. Very nowadays this is very required functionality in most of the software products. Privacy is becoming a very serious and very important concern, so always ensure that you show such notices and get the user's consent on that. 18th point, information systems which implement HTML5 must adhere to HTML5 security standard. Okay, so what it says is basically you should not allow access control allow origin. Okay, you basically should not set this header to star. Okay, your web application or REST API should not be accessed by any application in the world, whatever application in the world. No, you must have a specific set of applications which can access your information systems. Let me give you an example. You have developed a RESTful service called get list of employees. Okay, and if you set this access control allow origin, so if you set this access control allow origin header to star, then what it means, basically, or this security parameter, if you set it to star, then what it means is basically any domain in the world, okay, any web application or RESTful service in the world can straight away come and access your REST service. Of course, by authenticating to it, I'm not denying that, but basically you are making your REST service or web application open for entire world, but that is not the recommended approach. You should always set this parameter with only a specific set of hosts or the domains that you want to have communication with them, or you have allowed them to communicate with your REST service. So in my case, suppose I have developed one RESTful service and I want only google.com, yahoo.com and microsoft.com to access it, then I can specify those three host URLs into this allow access control allow origin list. So if I do that, then only those three domains can access this RESTful service. If others try to use it, then they will get this access control allow origin errors, or you can say cross origin resource sharing errors basically. Okay, implement XSRF handling. Okay, I have taken a snippet from Wikipedia. What does it mean is a cross-site request forgery, also known as one-click attack or session riding, or abbreviated as CSRF, okay, or XSRF. So this is basically called as cross-site request forgery, is a type of malicious exploit of a website where unauthorized commands are submitted from a user that the web application trusts. Okay, there are many ways in which the malicious website can transmit such commands. Okay, specifically crafted image tags, hidden forms, JavaScript, XML, HTTP requests, for example, can all work without the user's interactions and even their knowledge also. Unlike cross-site scripting, XSS, which exploits the trust a user has for a particular site, CSRF exploits the trust that a site has on a user of the browser. Okay, so see the difference here. So in a CSRF attack, an innocent end user is tricked by an attacker into submitting a web request that they did not intend. So if I say directly, it is a kind of man in the middle attack. Okay guys, so this may cause actions to be performed on the website that can include inadvertent client or server data leakage, change of session state, or manipulation of end user's account. So you must ensure that you implement XSRF handling. Okay, there are many useful APIs provided by many programming or web application development frameworks in order to avoid XSRF handling. There are various attributes have been given with respect to ASP.NET Core. I think we have anti-forgery token, the concept of anti-forgery tokens. Okay, server sends a token, okay, and whenever client sends the request back to the server, the client side code has to include this token into its request, okay, and it has to send it. If the incoming request's anti-forgery token doesn't match with the one server is handling, then such requests will be blocked and bad request, that is 400, will be returned to your end users. That way you are basically preventing the man in the middle attack. Okay, So that's what XSRF handling you have to do. Implementation of maintenance window pages. This is also one recommended practice whenever your application is going through the deployment. Okay, basically you are doing a new release, okay, and you have started the deployment or release of that application. So once the deployment starts, always implement a mechanism of maintenance window pages where you show that this particular application will be out for this much amount of time and will be available after this date time. Okay, so just mention that. I think that's sufficient for your end users. Whenever your end user try to access the application, they will be notified that okay, the application is going through the maintenance phase, so they will try after a specified amount of time you have mentioned in your maintenance window. Okay, this is the recommended practice and this should be there. Add course policies specific to your domains. One more thing, cross origin resource sharing. Okay, these are the policies basically which I have already explained here. Okay, over here, access control all origin, and also yeah, these both are somehow related. So always ensure that your REST APIs or your web application is being accessed by the same domain basically. For example, if I have created a web application and I have given a domain name like www.xyz.com, then only the contents, the JavaScript or the UI pages of www.xyz.com can only access my REST services or my web application basically. Okay, apart from that, if some other domain applications, JavaScript or any active content tries to make use of my API or my RESTful service or microservice, then they should be presented with course error. Okay, you should put this policy in your web applications. Only the specified or only the allowed origins will be able to access your web application or REST services or microservices. Apart from that, nobody else can access your web application or REST services. Again, how to implement this? All the programming frameworks or web application programming frameworks have their own way to specify this. Go through it as per your technology stack and implement this. Okay, the overall idea is that you must implement course policies, that is cross origin resource sharing, in your applications. Add HTTP strict header transport policy, that is HSTS, very strictly recommended protocol basically that every web application nowadays or information systems are implementing. So this HSTS is basically a policy or a protocol which enforces that any communication which happens with your client side code and server side code must happen on HTTPS, that is a secure HTTP transfer protocol. Okay, if you try to make use of your RESTful service or microservice using a HTTP protocol, then it will straight away it will return you a bad request error, or it will try to forward the request to its HTTPS version of your application. Okay, so always ensure you must implement this HTTPS, that is HSTS policy, in your web application. I hope you people understood the security measures that we need to take in order for our enterprise grade applications to pass the security reviews or security scans. Okay, I hope this session will be useful for you people. Thank you for listening and have a nice day.